Good morning and welcome. We'll begin in just a couple of seconds, but thank you for joining us, and we look forward to today's conversation. All right, it's at the top of the hour, whether it's 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific, or somewhere in between. We're really grateful for you spending part of your morning with us. Really want to thank you for being here during this season of gratitude. I'm reminded how grateful we are for the change makers in this industry, and that includes all of you, and for the outstanding leaders that we have here on the screen with our various material associations who are working toward moving the U.S. to a responsible, sustainable future. And so, on behalf of the National Stewardship Action Council and the Stewardship Action Foundation, I want to welcome you to our Deposit Return Systems webinar this morning. And I'm going to hand it over to Megan Quinn from Waste Dive with my appreciation to her for hosting and moderating.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm Megan Quinn. I'm the senior reporter for Waste Dive. Part of my beat is covering bottle bills, deposit return systems, and all the things that come with them, all the political, economic issues. So I'm very excited to get this conversation started and talk to each of our panelists, have a great discussion. I'm hoping that when we introduce ourselves, one thing we were talking about when we were organizing this. Was some of the misunderstandings or myths around bottle bills. And I'm hoping that as we introduce ourselves, maybe each of you can talk about sort of what is bringing you to this conversation and then what your most hated or most misunderstood thing about bottle bills is. So maybe we can start with Kate because she's closest to me on the screen.
Good morning, everyone. I had to check myself. I was like, okay, I can't say good morning to all the time zones. So thank you for the West Coast people for getting up a little early. My name is Kate Bailey. I'm here with the Association of Plastic Recyclers. We are the companies that actually do the bottle recycling. So the companies that wash, flake, grind, and recycle those plastic bottles and many other plastics back into new products. So we are fans of many different policies to improve plastics recycling. Bottle deposits are one of them. The reason I'm here is because 60% of what we collect for plastic recycling in terms of PET bottles comes from the 10 states that have bottle deposits. So without bottle deposits, we frankly would have half the recycling industry we have today for plastics. And I'm here to tell you plastics recycling works and we can do it a lot better, which is why we're here to talk about some of those things. Lots of things to talk about today. My favorite myth, it's kind of hard to pick a favorite because it's also like your unfavorite, right? It's like the one I hate hearing all the time. I spent nearly 20 years working for a company that ran a MRF, a materials recovery facility. And so I really cringe when I hear, oh, MRFs can't handle if we add a bottle deposit. There's no way that bottle deposits and curbside recycling can work together. That is just flat out not true. We need both. We need to collect bottles at home. We need to collect bottles on the go. And yes, MRFs will need to transition. Yes, we can help MRFs transition. Short story is this is a solvable problem, and it's about collecting all of the materials, and new types of deposit legislation have mechanisms in place to help the MRF through that transition. So yes, the MRF has real concerns, and yes, they are solvable concerns. So let's drop that myth that it can't work together, and let's figure out solutions to make it work together. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott, who's closest to me.
Thanks. I'm Scott DeFife. I'm the president of the Glass Packaging Institute. We are the trade association that represents the manufacturers of the glass containers in North America, but also glass recyclers and processors in North America. Behind me, I have a visual representation of, one of the clearest indicators of the difference between MRF glass, what we get from the commingled single stream, and bottle bill glass. And behind me, as I move over to the side, this is what we would call cullet. This is the finished material that needs to go back into a furnace. And so as you can see, I'll just let everybody else make their own judgment about how easy it is to get this in the middle from this pile or this pile. But we'll talk about it, throughout the hour. Um, Very happy to be here. Our statistic is very similar to what Kate suggested. The nuance is a little bit different in the glass industry, but we get nearly 60% of the cullet that can go back into a bottle comes from the 10 bottle bill states. Overall, there's glass recycling, and we are very happy to have the streams that we have. But when you recover it in a commingled single stream system, the glass is much more likely to end up at a different end market than a bottle. Which is not to say that those are bad, but it's not, as likely to go back into a bottle because of the quality issues and the volume issues that the bottle bill states present us. As far as myths, there's so many myths about glass recycling. I think the ones that relate to bottle bills the most that are frustrating are that glass is not worth anything on the commodity in the commodity markets. That's usually when we're talking about material that's 50% glass and 50% not glass. And I have a particular bone to pick recently when people suggest that wine bottles can't fit in RVMs or can't be part of, bottle bill systems because they're just too big. And that's just not true either. The existing infrastructure in the United States can handle most all of the wine bottles, and there's ways to recover that material in bottle bills as well. So those are my couple bones to pick in the myth fact front on bottle bills. And I guess I'm turning it over to Mike Smaha.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Smaha. I'm Vice President of Government Relations for the Can Manufacturers Institute. We are the trade association representing metal can manufacturers and their suppliers. So our folks make the aluminum beverage cans, steel food cans, aerosol cans, but also the can sheet that goes into making those products. And currently in the US, the recycling rate for aluminum beverage cans is 43% nationwide, which is crazy. So that means more than 60% are ending up in landfills or in litter or just not getting back to the can sheet makers. So the recycling refund, also known as the bottle bill or a deposit return system, because we make cans, we call them recycling refunds, is hands down the best policy in terms of getting the consumer to see an economic incentive on their container and recycle it, redeem it, so they can get their deposit back. One of the big myths that we hear from folks who oppose these programs is that this is an inconvenience to consumers because you're requiring them to take an extra step to recycle their bottle or can. Well, it is an additional step if they want to get their deposit back. They don't have to get their deposit back. They can choose to put it in their single stream bin. For cans, there's a decent chance that that can will get recycled, but still, even at the MRFs, we're finding 1 in 3, 1 in 4 cans get missorted and end up not going back into the aluminum pile. So we've seen some public polling. We're currently working on an effort in Rhode Island where we've asked voters, "Hey, is this an inconvenience to you all?" And by a 27% margin, they're saying no. This is actually something that we would love to see in Rhode Island. And we've seen similar polling in places like Massachusetts and in other existing recycling refund states where these programs still have overwhelming support from the public. They love their recycling refund program. They don't see it as a burden. To us, I think there's a clear message that consumers, when they have the option to participate, they want to do it.
Great. Well, thank you all. And I forgot to mention this at the top, but we would love to see your questions in the chat. We'll get to them as soon as we can throughout the conversation. But I wanted to kind of kick off our conversation with 2025. What's been happening so far this year with bottle bills? What's sort of the I don't know, developments or outcomes that you feel like really deserve a note, and what can we kind of learn from what we've seen so far this year? Um, I'll open it up to whoever wants to jump in first on that one.
Which one of us want to jump in first?
You're on
Well,
my
I'm,
screen,
I'm
so
happy to I'm happy to kick it off. So,
Yep.
interestingly enough, we've seen 2025, seen a couple more states pass EPR for packaging bills. We saw Washington State and Maryland. So, and I'll also mention that Oregon's EPR program is the first one to go into effect. So we've seen the brands who would be considered the producer responsibility organizations all of a sudden seeing the fees that they're going to have to pay in Oregon, and it's been pretty wide opening for them. And so it's kind of opened up an opportunity in the beverage space to have conversations with the beer folks, the wine and spirit folks as well, to say, hey, in Washington State and in Maryland, Colorado as well, there's an opportunity to have a recycling refund for beverage containers versus an EPR fee. Based on what you're seeing in Oregon, I guess you pick your poison, even though we don't see recycling refunds as certainly being poisonous, but I think that there is a cost savings for folks who want to utilize a recycling refund program versus an EPR program. So we are starting to see more beverage brands really start to kind of wonder, like, you know what, maybe we need to think more seriously about recycling refund programs. I'll turn it over to Kate and Scott to chime in too.
Yeah, I can building on what Mike was saying. The bills were there was active consideration of bottle deposit recycling refund bills in a couple states. Washington, was a very active bill this year, while EPR passed the bottle deposit return system bill did not get finished in this legislative session. It didn't die, but because it's a 2-year session, but it did not, cross the finish line like the EPR bill did in Washington. In Maryland, something very similar. Bottle bill made it out of the House Environment Committee. It's the furthest that the bill has made it out of the Maryland Assembly in several years. And there was introduction and discussion in Rhode Island as well. All three of us are members of the Coalition for High Performance Recycling, Chipper Coalition. We had a bill introduced in Rhode Island that got a fair amount of legislative attention and action in the Rhode Island legislature. Ultimately, it was turned into a infrastructure study, inventory study bill before the end of the Rhode Island session. But new an our model is a new model. I think Kate was alluding to that, and Mike also. We can talk about that a little bit more and what changes we see going forward for a more modern system. But in addition, New York has had very active discussions on expanding their bottle bill. Iowa has been assessing the changes that they made in terms of redemption access. Michigan has had several meetings and study meetings about whether they need to modernize the Michigan bottle bill. So there's a lot of activity going on. I would say even states like Tennessee have dabbled in the debate about what to do with EPR and deposit return systems. So there's a lot of legislative activity in that space.
Oh, one more big surprise, I think, for everybody is what happened in Texas. So Texas
Oh yeah,
had a
forgot about Texas.
recycling refund bill, very simple language that actually passed out of committee and was brought to the House floor, or it was listed amongst all the bills that needed to have a full House vote on the very final day of the deadline for bills to pass one chamber and move to the other. Unfortunately, they ran out of time and they couldn't get to the recycling refund bill in Texas. But it's pretty amazing when you think about Texas, really taking a lot of interest and moving something out of a committee. That's a pretty big win.
So I just want to add on two quick things. One, a huge shout out to Rhode Island. Even though they didn't get across the finish line, they ended up with a pretty strong needs assessment that has the best incorporation of bottle deposit that we've seen yet. of all the states with needs assessments. So I think that's a really solid platform for states that are considering that approach. And thanks to the great work that's happened there and still happens today. The other thing that I want to highlight is at least for me, it was kind of a light bulb moment when we were talking about how EPR and deposit systems can work better together. And you bring your bottle deposits back to some kind of depot. Well, we're also learning so much as EPR is rolling out that not everything is going to be collected through a curbside recycling program, and that you're going to need depots to drop off things, maybe like your plastic bags or other hard to recycle stuff. Many of us are familiar with bringing our electronics to a depot for recycling. That's, all those things that just can't go in the blue bin but are recyclable. And this sort of light bulb moment of like, wow, you can scale a depot program that can collect bottles. It can collect hard to recycle materials. It can collect different types of packaging, and the opportunity to use multiple systems to fund those depot programs and really scale that across the country. I was like, oh, that would be so convenient for consumers to be able to go to one spot. So as we kind of evolve the programs moving forward, I think we're seeing those synergies in how we start up new deposit programs.
I'm glad you brought that up, Kate, because one thing that we wanted to talk about in this discussion too is some of the broader sort of like policy model discussions, because we are seeing states that have just a bottle bill, just EPR, are considering some version of both, have some version of both. So I'm hoping that maybe all of you can kind of expand a little bit about this, sort of like the opportunities and the sort of tensions between these two approaches, and sort of like what you're seeing as being, maybe not just the interesting interplays between the two, but sort of like where you're seeing some examples of, these working well together. Sort of like, I don't know, give me some more background on sort of how we're seeing these two policies sort of intertwine.
So I can start.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
From a plastics recycling perspective, we have a long way to go. There is so much more we can recycle. We can recycle more effectively. So I really hate the EPR or DRS conversation. We need both and we also need recycled content mandates and better labeling and quite a few other things. So I'm sorry to say that our playbook is a little long, but we have a lot of work to do. And we also need to scale some opportunities around reuse and refill and source reduction and all of the things. And so I just want people to understand this is a fundamental paradigm shift, right? We're talking about how do we scale plastics recycling over the next couple decades, and what are the things we can do right now, what's going to take a little longer in time. So it's hard to see people in camps sometimes, because it's like, yes, all it's like climate change, right? It is all of the solutions on the table. This is a really big problem to solve. And so to me, it's really understanding the scope of what we're trying to solve and how we need all of the pieces to work better together.
Yeah, let me pick up on some of the things that Kate was talking about. This either or camps, between EPR and DRS is really not helpful. And the depot issue is just a classic example, right? EPR as it rolls out. Now, none of the 7 states that have done EPR already, none of those bills are exactly the same. We're starting to get some harmonization on the EPR side with the Minnesota, the Washington, and the Maryland bills, kind of evolving out of the Colorado model. But California, Oregon, Maine, very different from those. And some of the states that are still very actively considering EPR, New York, New Jersey, some of the other states, are not necessarily following any of the states that have gone so far. But very clearly, even in Oregon, there's a robust, new depot system, right? For, supposedly for the harder to recycle materials. Colorado, which had very different goals going in for EPR, which, Colorado had a relatively low overall recycling rate when it started compared to Oregon, right? Not just two different extreme, sides of the coin about what the existing infrastructure looked like. A lot of the EPR is about getting basic curbside recycling to places that didn't have any basic curbside recycling. That's great. That's fantastic. That alone is going to capture some more material. But as Kate said, when you start to talk about the higher performance levels and the expectations and the bottle to bottle circularity or package to package circularity, even, you need higher quality material. And there's just there's no substitute for creating some separate streams. And of course, most, folks don't want to go back to dual stream or multi-stream at the curbside or anything like that. The bottle deposit program, the return program that is developed there in the depot model, in addition to the return in through other modalities, creates that separate stream. And not only does that help the materials that are being collected, the glass, the can, and the PET bottles, but it helps the fiber quality. It helps the other, loose plastic quality improve at the curbside. The more that we create separate streams, the higher the quality for all the materials. And our studies have shown that they can benefit each other by increasing the commodity value for all of it and in lowering the processing costs, so that the EPR programs eventually are going to benefit from a lower average recycling cost per ton for all the materials, not just the materials that are in the bottle deposit return or the recycling refund return system.
Yeah, just real quick. I just want to touch upon litter control. I see my friend Jed Thorpe from Rhode Island saved the Bay Narragansett on the call. I was just up with him in Providence this week, and we were meeting with cities and towns, and one of the questions that we kept talking about was the fact that there's nips, little micro liquor spirit containers, all over the place. Not just in Rhode Island, but in other states as well. And it's a real problem. And people don't want to see that stuff on the ground. So what the 10 states that have these recycling refund programs have really created is that consumer incentive to see value on that container. So if they see it on the ground, or, but they think before even just like throwing it on the ground, they might say, you know what, I'm going to pick that up and see if I can get my 5 cents or my 10 cents back. We're going for 10 cents in Rhode Island. We're going real big. And that's going to be a big savings for municipalities that, have to spend money on cleaning out stormwater drains or just, community groups that are volunteering their time for litter pickup. So I think that's another important benefit of having a recycling refund program with an EPR program.
And you all kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm hoping we can get a little bit more into your specific materials, cans, glass, plastic. How do you see DRS systems actually influencing the collection and sorting of your specific material? I know Scott got into this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about what we've seen already in states that already have this, what you're hoping to see in other states, and then kind of just sort of how these infrastructure for DRS can kind of help with that collection?
I'm happy to lead off on this one. So, when it comes to metal cans, like I said, almost 60% are ending up in litter, or just not even being recycled, right? So that's a huge amount of material that's not being brought back in for remanufacturing. So I think when we talk about why this is so important to us, we face international tariffs on can sheet coming in from Canada, and from other parts of the globe, and I know we'll get into the business case a little later on. But I think there's a really good opportunity through these recycling refund programs to expand consumer participation and access, right? So, the old models are, you take it back to the store that you bought the container from. Well, the great thing is there's been a huge jump in just ingenuity and people thinking outside the box about how do you make this easier so the consumer doesn't just have to go back to the store. I think we've seen companies like Clink up in the Northeast, the Oregon Beverage Recycling Co-op out in Oregon, come up with ways to bring bag drop programs to more communities and access points, in both, urban areas, suburban areas, and rural areas. So I think there's a great opportunity for some entrepreneurial, spirit and business opportunities here on how do you make this easier for consumers. I certainly think, look, if Uber can create an app to deliver food to you, I think somebody out there probably has a way to come to, your home or your apartment building, pick up your bagged, containers that have their barcode on them, take them, for you, so you don't even have to take it any place to be redeemed. And maybe they get a little share of the unredeemed deposit as part of the contract with the consumer. So I think there's great ways to think about infrastructure opportunities to make it easier for consumers.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Mike was talking about, for glass, it's just really clear that the recovery rate is higher in bottle deposit states. So we're actually getting more material back in the first place. For us, the yield is 3 times higher out of a bottle deposit material than commingled single stream. When it's crushed at the very point of pickup, mixed in with everything else, it's really hard to start to extract that. And just the way most MRFs are designed, and it's completely logical to a certain extent. The small material is broken together. It goes through one of the very first things that happens at any, of even the newest MRFs is a glass breaker and a screen system to separate the large material from the small material. And the small material is sent down into one stream and really begs for secondary sorting and processing, right? We see a lot of other small format materials, small packaging, and other things that don't belong in the system end up in the glass stream. So the yield from there, from the point of collection through to the point of processing, is just much higher at a bottle deposit uh, material flow. Those bottles can live on to be bottles again, or any of the other end market materials, right? But when you're starting off with more fines and granular material, that's been crushed a couple of different times before it ever gets to the glass processor, you're going to limit how much of that can get back, into the supply chain for circularity. Um, I'll also say a critical difference in the recovery streams is for reuse and refill. When the bottle is crushed and commingled, whether it's a glass bottle or a can or a plastic bottle at curbside, and mixed in with all the other material and the contamination, that's not suitable for a reuse refill system in the plastics industry. And I'm sure Kate can elaborate. There's all other food grade concerns that they have to get at. When you're returning the bottles whole, they can stay as bottles before they even get recycled. And so you need, if, for the advocates that are, want to see more reuse and refill, it is almost necessary to pair that with some sort of separate return system to recover the material whole.
So I want to add 2 points, really want to emphasize, so all plastics recycling across the US, we recycle about 5 billion pounds a year. It's a good start. There's a lot more we can do. We have the infrastructure, meaning we have the plant space. We've got the conveyor belts, the lines, everything to recycle 2 billion pounds more right now without adding another plant. So the most important thing we need is for people to put those bottles in the bin. Curbside deposit system, like, we can increase the plastic recycling rate overnight. If we can get those bottles back, we are built and ready for it. So that is, first and foremost, it's a collection issue for us. And then second, I want to just really underscore what Scott said about quality. And I know many of you don't run a recycling facility. So you're like, quality, that sounds great, but why do I care? So let me translate this into something that might help. When a plastics recycler gets higher quality materials, We use less energy, we use less water, we produce fewer emissions to turn out those plastic bottles back into new bottles, back into carpet, things like that. When we make good quality recycled plastic, we are displacing the use of new virgin plastic. So if you're on this call today because you would like to see us use less virgin plastic, that means we need to use more recycled plastic, which means we need high quality stuff in our system. So it's all about kind of why does quality matter? It improves the environmental benefits and it reduces our use of new plastic, which I hope is a shared goal for many people on this call.
Great. Well, so okay, we covered collection. Things get collected. Now we need a market for it. And I know in the last, especially the last few years, there's been a lot of discussions about strengthening domestic markets for this material. So, hope we can kind of move into that aspect of the conversation. And just from each of your materials perspectives, can you talk a little bit about, where you're seeing the support for domestic recycled content and sort of where DRS in your mind kind of fits into making sure that these materials are turned into new products?
So I would love to start because I think we have a big problem on the plastic side of things. Things are a bit more complicated than metal and glass. We would love to collect more plastics for recycling. We have the capacity to do so, but where we also need your help is we need more buyers. We need beverage companies buying more recycled content. We need carpet companies buying more recycled content. We need everything made out of more recycled plastic. One of the problems out there two problems out there on the market. There is a lot of really cheap virgin plastic out there, more than we've ever seen before. So you've seen a lot of companies, a lot of big brand companies backing away from their commitments. They said by 2025 they were going to buy more recycled content. Now they're not, which means we need somewhere for those recycled plastics to go. So for plastics, it's really a twofold solution. We need to collect more, and we need companies committed and required to buy those recycled plastics and use it instead of virgin materials. So we really need to emphasize that market demand out there. And happy to talk to folks more about recycled content policies and other ways we can drive that. The second part of that is we need to make sure the recycled content that companies are using is actually coming from our US or our North American recycling programs. Because one of the problems we're seeing today is that some of those brand companies that might be required to buy recycled content are bringing in recycled content from Thailand, Vietnam, other parts of Asia, because it's cheaper, because Asia makes a lot of stuff cheaper than us. But this is about making sure we are recycling our materials here. Made in America, remade in America is a great pledge that NSAC has put together. We're in a renaissance of American manufacturing, America first. We really need stronger policies that look at making sure recycled materials stay in this country, are reused to make new materials in this country, and we're really putting disincentives on the use of imported materials, especially on the plastic side.
Mike, you want to go next? Because I think I can conclude.
Oh, sure.
Slightly different.
It's 20 seconds. The can sheet manufacturing industry has invested hundreds of millions of dollars here in the United States for the past, several years, to produce more can sheet here, right? The problem is we can't get enough used beverage cans back to feed those plants. So, for us, this is about reshoring, onshoring, however the current administration wants to talk about bringing domestic manufacturing back. This is like the classic story about how we need to do this. We've got all this material, whether it's glass, it's plastic, it's metal, that we are consuming and we're disposing of here in the US. Like, why are we not capturing it and remaking things from it?
So in the glass world, there's at least one key difference, for the materials and the disposition and the circular economy. So recycled glass has never gone overseas, right? It stays domestic. It's largely a regional commodity. Maybe there's a little bit of transboundary movement between Canada and the US in the Northeast, and a little bit of, US and Mexico, from California to Texas, a little bit, but not much. Um, it's all largely domestic North American material. Our biggest competition is the landfill. Most of the glass that is in the economy ends up in the landfill. Now, that's different in the deposit states than in the non-deposit states. It's just too easy sometimes, and not and very inexpensive sometimes to put material in a landfill, or landfill cover policies, or landfill cover that gets called recycling policies and things of that. It's very hard to compete with that. But the bottle industry and the bottle industry customers, the brands that use glass to put their product in glass, all want twice as much recycled content as we are capable of giving. The fiberglass industry wants to use more. The aggregates industry wants to use more. So the end markets that really shouldn't have to compete for material like this are ending up competing for material, and it's limiting the amount of recycled content that packaging bottle production can use for that. In addition, the quality issue is also a big limiter on how much that we can get back into the furnace, because for the glass industry, landfill is one of the biggest competitions. The small ceramic, stone, porcelain things and metals can't go back into a glass furnace. And so when the quality level is what it is coming out of it, there's going to be an artificial cap on how much of that recycled content can go back into a furnace. But when we have bottle bill material states and production in bottle bill states, that number can go up north of 50 to 60, 70% or even higher, because of the quality of the material that we have access to that can go back into the furnace. And just like Kate and just like Mike have said, for the glass industry, we're offsetting more than a ton of raw materials when we use a ton of recycled glass, because it takes less energy to remelt that which is already glass than to convert the raw materials into glass.
Great. And another interesting thing about just the makeup of this panel today is that for all the differences that you all have between your different materials, you're also working together on some of these policies, even though, you have different challenges in different markets and things like that. Maybe you all can talk a little bit about sort of how each of your organizations and material streams are sort of working together on DRS issues. And yeah, maybe we'll start with that, and then we can kind of expand from there.
I'm happy to start. So Scott mentioned early on that our three organizations are part of the Coalition for High Performance Recycling, or CHIPR. Encourage folks to just Google it, Coalition for High Performance Recycling. We'll put a link in the chat as well. It's an interesting group. You've got different packaging materials. You've got manufacturers. You've got environmental groups. You've got recycling policy thought leaders and as part of it, and you've also got a number of brands, a number of beverage companies that acknowledge, like, hey, we're trying to get more stuff back. We're trying to get our post-consumer recycled content rates up. And we know, our industry has a problem with litter, and so like we have to find a new policy paradigms to try to fix this solution. I mentioned there was a question in the chat about a national policy for recycling refunds. I think all of us would love to see a national solution. We can get more into that later on, but it's why that's such a challenge. But yeah, I think we would be all for that.
So I want to add on, Mike mentioned national. So I have a like proud moment I want to share. So Heidi brought all of us together a couple of years ago. I don't remember. And we lobbied in Congress. She's done a lot of great lobby days for a national bottle bill. And I remember being in one of the Senate offices, and the staffer just looked at a couple of us and was like, so you all are competing industries and you're here asking for the same thing. Yeah, we don't see that very often. Like, so I wanted just to kind of underscore, like, that is really important to communicate to legislators, either at the state or the federal level. They don't see different industries coming together saying this would help all of us. We're all in the same position for domestic manufacturing. And I think it's not just about us working together, it's also about us working together with all of you. Because when environment and business comes together and say, here's the thing we want, we're not fighting, we're actually working together. I've had legislators go, oh, great, like we can run with this, right? We have people on the same page. So just really that ability to coordinate, I've seen it turn heads, it can turn heads, and I think that is our power of being together.
And I'll add that I think the other thing that has really been helpful when we all come together, as different materials that need the same basic solution, right? And we've been able to put aside material on material issues to like work on systems change, right? The other thing that we've all recognized is the core of the 10 deposit return systems that currently exist in the United States are all 20, 30, 40 years old, right? And we have to acknowledge that the economy is different, the challenges from and expectations at retail and MRFs and waste haulers and things of that nature are legitimate issues that need to be dealt with. And so by coming together and really looking at a forward-looking policy that's in the same family of the ones that exist today, but is really a more modern way of looking at it, looking at the advancements that have happened in reverse logistics and things of that nature, and equipment and innovation that Mike was talking about. There's a whole different way of organizing this. Our proposal works in the same system as a PRO, where certain entities are taking responsibility for that association, does not rely on or mandate certain things happening at retail locations or mandate distributors to be participate in the program to a certain extent. So looking at a much more incentive-based recovery system that is more innovative and really focused on recovery and making it convenient and filling in those convenient zones, gaps, and things of that nature. Learning from the things that have been going on the past several years. The dealer co-op in California, as we expanded the California bottle bill to include wine and spirits, is also, I think, a really innovative, it's not a lot, it's not rocket science, right? But it is new to the bottle bill policy arena to let dealers, collaborate and try to figure out how to help solve the redemption challenges that the states that have had bottle bills see. So we came together, put our heads together on modernizing as well, and for a new generation of recycling, refund, and deposit return systems.
Yeah, I'll just add, we've got our friends, our customers in the beverage side who are on this call. And we've got, our friends on the waste hauling side as well. We've always been open and willing partners to sit down with them and talk with them about what are your pain points with these programs in the 10 states. And as we think about new states, how can we address them? How can we make this work for your industries? So we just encourage all the stakeholders to reach out to Chipper and have these conversations with us. Like we need a solution, but we want to make it work for everybody.
Great. And before I go on to my next question, just want to encourage the audience, if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat or we'll have a little bit of time towards the end for live questions. So definitely keep your brain cooking on that. I also wanted to ask a little bit about, you guys have already all highlighted a little bit of this, but I'm curious sort of what either as Chipper or as your individual organizations, like how are you actually doing this engagement on the ground? Because we know with bottle bills and any kind of legislation, there are so many stakeholders involved. We talked at the very top of this conversation about how there's so many different opinions and, processes that people think is the right way forward. Some people don't even want DRS in their state. So maybe you can get a little bit more into detail about how you're actually doing this engagement, stakeholder interactions, and sort of like what sort of lessons you can draw from as we move into, 2026, 2027.
Yeah, why don't I try to start? When I started over here at the Glass Packaging Institute, which is now over 6 years ago, which is incredible that I've been here for 6 years. Several of the first calls that I got were from, and this was even pre-pandemic, right? But many of the states were, and cities, municipalities were still dealing with the tail end of China's national sword and things of that nature. The glass recycling rate had been going down for a couple of years, not because glass was caught up in China national sword, but because the overall recycling market had completely turned upside down, and cities that used to make money off their recycling systems were turning that around and upside down. And so they were trying to jettison weight. And, unfortunately for us, the jettisoning weight meant, excluding glass from their curbside bin. And so we really needed to jump on it really quickly. And, one of the best ways to try to understand what is really going on the ground is to immerse yourself in that situation and start to talk to the people on the ground. So we got involved very early. We've been engaging in Washington state recycling issues for the entire 6 years that I've been here before any bill was involved. We had to be in California because of all of the things that were going on with California and the closure of the redemption centers and things of that nature. So we get very involved in each state that we need to. There's a prioritization, of course, and you have to assess, what's likely to happen versus what needs that attention and also the volume of the material in certain extents. But there is not a state that has a bottle deposit program that we have not been to, have not visited with, have not testified at, have not met with stakeholders in virtually every single state that has a bottle deposit program in the past 6 years that we've been here. And so you put boots on the ground for the glass industry. We also have plants and operations. Our members have plants and operations in virtually all of these states. And so, working with our members to engage where we can engage in each of, not just with the state legislators, but with the municipal operators and solid waste management officials and all the other stakeholders in the system. You just have to roll up your sleeves, get involved, and start to understand the mechanics of what's going on in that particular state so you can solve those problems.
And Scott gave a great rundown of all the different ways I think all of us are showing up virtually, in person, all of the things. One more thing I just want to add on there is the value of field trips, that we've all been on field trips with legislators, sponsored field trips in the US, in Canada, in Europe, taking people into these plants and going, oh, this is how it works. Oh, we can totally do this. Or understanding, just seeing, I can't underscore enough the importance of being able to see how it happens in various areas and being able to talk through the challenges, how different places have negotiated through it. So that is definitely something that's very valuable for all of us to participate in.
Megan, one other thing I found that I shouldn't say it surprised me, but policymakers, even regulators, right, who work on these issues on a regular, there's so much that they have to face and understand. And with recycling, it's something so ordinary necessarily that happens every day for consumers, but it stops when they put the material in the bin, or it stops when and there's a there's a real it's a much more complicated system to understand all of the moving parts. And so it does take some time to educate people and really showing them, taking them even in the Colorado EPR advisory board thing, nothing to do really with deposit return, but just we had a whole field trip day for the advisory board that included folks from the regulatory agencies and local governments, where we walked them through, here's a bottle in a store. Here's how it gets returned. Here's where it goes next. It goes to processing. It goes back to a bottle factory. It gets refilled and it's back on a shelf, right? And just walking the entire advisory board and regulatory, officials through that in a material by material category was eye-opening to a lot of the people. So they could really just see it and see how close, things were in the Colorado system and things that it really helps to those field trips really help.
Great. Maybe we can look into our crystal balls and look into the future now as we get close to the end of this discussion. What's going to happen in 2026, 2027 legislatively, and also just in terms of, other proposals or trends that you're seeing that we should be paying attention to in the DRS space as we move forward?
There's going to be a lot of legislative activity on these issues. I can say in Washington State, Maryland, Rhode Island, we're all going to see recycling refund, push opportunities. And each of them, brings a bit of a new modern approach to the traditional ways that these have been, run in the past. And I think that's really important to take notice. 2027, I think because you've got a handful of states that are currently doing needs assessments. I could see Illinois having some really big EPR discussions in 2027. But I think, as we in Virginia, right, the newest trifecta blue state with big, Democratic margins, I think Virginia is a really interesting opportunity because there's glass and there's aluminum and I'm sure plastic manufacturing happening in the Commonwealth as well. So yeah, I think these issues are not gonna stop. And even if there's a needs assessment happening in 2026, these conversations are not gonna pause.
Megan, I also think that as the EPR states that have moved forward, get into their action plans, get into their, plans, and, in the first 5 years, I totally understand, depending upon the state, they're just trying to organize and figure out how to implement a new program and change the way that the program is paid for and things of that nature. Eventually, there's going to get to be a performance objective that needs to be met. And we know that the highest performing programs around the world, from countries and provinces in Canada to our friends in the north, that achieve the 70, 80, 90% recovery rate for all the different materials, usually have some sort of combination. There is just not one system that handles it, all that gets you to the rates that people are looking for. And when you start to get to those points, I think there's going to be a realization that some need to change and augment the system in order to get to the higher performance rates is going to be necessary. So I think this is something that's going to be with us for the next 5 to 10 years at least.
And I want to answer the question a little differently. I want to talk about the themes that I expect we'll hear in the next 2 years. The first one should be no surprise. Cost, cost, cost. That's what governments are going to be talking about, at least for next year, if not more. Federal government cuts are coming down. Every state is talking about their budget. Local governments are talking about their budget. This is hard, and this is also an opportunity because we're talking about deposit systems that remove the cost of having to clean up litter, that EPR programs that take the cost of recycling off of the household or the local government and put it back onto the packaging companies. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to talk about the cost to local governments and the cost to consumers of the problems we have today and the opportunity to reduce those costs with new programs like deposits, like EPR moving forward. So I want to kind of turn that look at that as an opportunity to talk about how we reduce costs to local governments. And then I also want to emphasize domestic manufacturing, right? We are all here because we have plants around the country that employ people in probably pretty close to almost every state. And we're talking about jobs and domestic manufacturing and a resilient domestic economy. And that message is always welcome in governments and is particularly welcome these days. So I think that those are two themes that are really going to be beneficial for us to focus on in the next couple of years.
Great. We had a cost question in the chat, which I think has been answered, but you had mentioned costs to, governments and, consumers. But there's also this question in the chat about costs to like producers for DRS stuff. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on sort of like what those considerations are if we're talking, if you've been talking to producers about DRS costs considerations, especially as some of them are also integrating with EPR costs as well. And it's okay if you don't have much to say about that, but I am curious.
I think I hit on it a little bit before. When you look at the synergies between the two programs, EPR, as Kate said, and I think we picked up on this a little bit with the depot, collection system, not everything is going to fit in that curbside bin, right? There are naturally things, materials, and it's not just our materials. There's other materials out there that do not necessarily work well in the commingled curbside bin. So there is going to need to be a series of depots. If the deposit return system, recycling refund system can help build those depots that then can scale up to add the other hard to recycle, that's a place where the two programs are working together. In the states that have them, in the provinces that have them, there is always a relationship between one PRO and the other PRO for taking care of each other's material that ends up in the wrong place. Consumers are always going to end up dropping certain things off in places where they may not necessarily belong. But together, and if states could actually look holistically at their entire recycling system rather than siloed, well, this is my program and this is my program and this program, they don't touch and cross, right? Blow that up and look holistically across the entire state. Like, what's the entire recovery rate for mixed material X, Y, and Z, rather than what's the recovery rate in this program versus this program? I think you get synergies at the government level that it costs less. And we have data that shows that the overall cost to recycle these tons is lower, not just for the beverage containers, but for everyone in the system when you combine these programs because of the synergies that you get from the recovery and expanding the recovery network for all of the materials. In addition, I'll say it again, the quality goes up, which means the commodity value goes up, which means the processing price goes down. It may be more to collect, but every other step of the system after the collection is less costly going down, and we can show and talk to our producer friends about the ultimate end cost of this, not just the cost for one part of the program.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and Kate's touched upon post-consumer recycled content. Well, that's always an ego modulation bonus in any EPR system. If your package has more recycled content in it, you're going to pay less. So, if you're a brand thinking, well, what's the best way that I'm going to hit my goals, my targets here for post-consumer recycled content? It's through the recycling refund program. And that's where you're going to help to see a cost savings, at the end of the day, and the money that you're paying into the 7 states with EPR, because you're going to get a reduced fee because of that higher post-consumer recycled content in your container.
Unmuted myself. There we go. We're getting up on time, so I wanted to take one last opportunity. We have about 1 minute for other questions. Otherwise, I'm going to kick it back to Heath. Thank you so much for everyone being here and sharing all of your thoughts. It's been a great conversation. I'm sure all the panelists would be interested in continuing the conversation offline. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Megan, for hosting this, and thank you to our incredible panelists with their subject matter expertise and their national leadership on this important topic, and also for creating a better planet, a better improved local economies and more resilient supply chains, and also more resilient communities. So we are just, again, incredibly grateful to all of you who participated today. Would love to keep this conversation going. You heard about Chipper. Also want to add a plug for our National Recycling Refunds Working Group to sort out the biggest challenges and look at what's advancing in many of these states and start to bring this solution to great opportunity for America and for Americans. Speaking of which, if you haven't signed our Remade in America pledge, we welcome you to do that. There's a link in the chat as well. But thank you all for joining. We're very grateful for this. We'll send out the recording. And again, many thanks to our moderator and our fantastic panelists.
Thank you all. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Thanks for having us.
everyone.
Thank you all.